So in this video, we're going to carry on from the last web video with the top menu using dnaweb, and we're going to add the JavaScript now. So this is basically an introduction to JavaScript, just carrying on from the previous video though. So we're going to do it actually practical. We're not just going to talk through. We're going to basically make something usable from it. So you're going to learn fast. You're going to breeze over basics, if you will, just so we can get something working. And you're just going to learn it in the field, if you will, the same way as I teach everything else. So just going to create a new folder, just call it site. And because in the last video, the top menu, I've already committed to dnaweb, we can just type in dnaweb in the address bar of the folder. This will open up as well. I've got a new version of dnaweb that I'll release next week that automatically opens Visual Studio Code in the folder that you run it from, if you select it in your configuration, which by default it's on. And then in here, I can just type new template, fabric.modern1, and then press enter twice. That'll pull in the website. Oh, I've got this one bug I've also got to fix. I notice pops up sometimes, like a race condition. Let's just run that once more. dnaweb, it's already created the template for us, so we don't need to recreate it. And we have, here's the website. This is the top menu that we created in the last video. And also now in the template, we've got the JavaScript working here. So you can see this is what we want it to do. You scroll down and all it does is apply the styles. So I'll show you what happens. We spoke about it in the last video, but just so you catch up. You can see as we scroll, you've got the class that we made, this top menu standard. And as we scroll down, it then adds a reduced class to it. That's what we wanted it to do. And that comes from this attribute we've added to the HTML, data scroll down class. And we tell it we want to add the class reduced when it scrolls down. So when you scroll the page down, the JavaScript simply adds the class. And you can do that manually. So if you double clicked on your class like we did again in the last video, and just added a reduced class and pressed enter, you'd see the same thing happening. So that's all the JavaScript does in terms of the scroll down. So we're going to make that. And then also when you are on a smaller device and you get this hamburger menu, when we click this, we want to, let's just go to, show more of that. When you click this, we want the menu, which again, we should see when we click. You see it adds an expanded to the UL class. And again, we styled this so that when it's got the class expanded on, that it will automatically have translate set to 0 to bring it back in. And again, we did the HTML and the CSS in the last video. So the way this is actually animating in is not the JavaScript. The only thing the JavaScript's doing is when you click this button, it adds an expanded class, which again comes from this data top menu class. And when you click it again, it removes it. So it basically toggles it on and off. So that's what we're going to be doing with the JavaScript. So that's all it does. You scroll down, it adds a class, and you click a menu and it adds a class. That's basically what we're doing. So fairly simple, but you'll see it's still quite a lot of JavaScript to do that. So if you've just created the new folder, typed in dnaweb here and pressed enter, and then in dnaweb typed new template fabric.modern1, you'll get this template up and running. You'll get Visual Studio open. If you don't have the version yet and you're running Visual Studio Code, just go to the folder, right click, and select to open with code, and that'll do the same thing, but now dnaweb, the new version in a week, will do that for you. And that'll open up all the files, which is basically just, if you go into the site, again, same as previous videos, you've got source, HTML, Sass, and what we've got, the JavaScript that's working right now, if we were to just go to HTML and look at the index page, you can see we've got the JavaScript here. So we have this JavaScript file here. The other thing you'll notice, I've changed back to my Intel machine because that's Threadripper AMD was really slow. And now I've got a fresh install of Visual Studio Code. You'll notice we don't have any HTML hints in here. So to fix that, you just go to Preferences, Settings. And then on this side, I think you type it in here. And I think files.associations. And then I think it's just star.dhtml and colon and then HTML. And I think that's all we do. And that'll mean any file ending in .dhtml should be highlighted as HTML. Not sure what it's complaining about. It's just warning me, I guess. Expected comma. Oh, expected comma there. There we go. So I think, there we go, it's instant. So now we've got HTML highlighting. So in this template, the difference between the last video and this video is not really anything. The CSS we wrote is still here. It's just been put into the actual Fabric template engine. So the list style, the UL horizontal, has gone into here. The menu has got the horizontal menu style. And the top menu has got basically the top menu there for keeping it above and pushing the content below, and the standard menu here. So it's all basically what we did in the last video. It's just been moved around and cleaned up and embedded into our Fabric template system so that other people can create things instantly going forward. That's the point of it. And then the other thing that changed is basically we added this JavaScript file. So if we remove that JavaScript file, and we now see we're back to where we were in the last video, where nothing actually changes and nothing happens when you click. So that's where we are. And now what we'll do is we'll make this JavaScript. So if we went to the web root where the outputs are, you'll see there's a JS folder here, the DNA Fabric, and this has got the original code in. So we're just going to delete that because we're going to make it. And then inside the JS folder, which again, if you want to look at it visually, it's just, this is your web root, assets, and then there's just this JavaScript folder. So if you don't have one, just make one. And then in here, we'll just make a file. So you can just go right click new file, but I simply just do it inside of Visual Studio Code. Control N to open a new window, Control S to save, and then just go up into web root, assets, JavaScript, change the save as type to all, and then in here, we're just going to call this, we need to split the JavaScript into multiple files to keep it clean. And in future, like in the very near future, we'll move to TypeScript, so this can be a lot more organized and compiled and what have you, similar to Sass and CSS. But for now, we're going to write raw JavaScript. So this is your first JavaScript file. So we'll call this dna.core.js because JavaScript files end in .js. Then in your index page, in here, if you just run DNA Web, you should get the updated live variables. You should have now be able to go $! And I think it's JS link, $! save. Nope. Let's see, live variables. Oop. Oh, I haven't pushed that one yet. So I'm going to make one for that. So I will add that, but for now, just type in script type is text JavaScript. And then the source is the assets folder, the JS folder, and we've got one called dna.core to this file. If by the time you're watching this video, you'll probably find that doing $! JS link, $! and saving will replace with this because I'm going to push a new version of the live variables to include this quicker way of typing. Similar to when you do $! CSS link and save. You get the the CSS sheet link. I'll be doing the same for the JavaScript link. I just forgot to push it before this video. So this is how you include a JavaScript file. You simply point to it similar to the CSS. You do script type as text / JavaScript. SRC, which stands for source, is then pointing to the file. And now when we run this, or rather it's already run, so if we move that over and have this here, you can press F12 in Firefox if you're using it and go to network. And then if we just simply edit something and save, you'll see the page reloads and you can see there dna.core, it's found the file because it's gone green. So we know it's got the file. If we were to give it the wrong name, so if we were to give it like core2 and save, you'll see it refreshes and you get this big 404 that it couldn't find the file. So we know it's found the file by looking at network and then refreshing the page, and you'll see it's loaded there, and 200 means basically OK in HTML responses. And you can see it's got a script, JavaScript, but it's no file size. So that's linking the JavaScript file. The next thing we want to do, so I'm going to move this over. I've noticed these don't move together for some reason as well when they should. So JavaScript. We'll get started with a real basic. This is what I always do to make sure something's actually alive and working. Type alert, open brackets, and you can either do double quotes like C# or single quotes. So I'll stick with double quotes because it's the same as C#. Hi, and then a colon. You save, and as soon as this page automatically reloads, you'll see it says hi. So you know this is now running because you're getting the pop-up dialog. So there's your first bit of JavaScript, and that's kind of how I always start to make sure the file's actually loading. So a bit about JavaScript. This isn't a compiled language like C# is. This is exactly as is. So this is sent to the browser, and your browser reads this exact text file and interprets, the content. So it's an interpreted language, not a compiled one. Not that makes much difference, but in general, what you have to consider is JavaScript is, or wasn't rather, very efficient. It's certainly got way more efficient. For example, this entire Visual Studio code is written in JavaScript. Every single thing we're doing here is actually in JavaScript. But in general, JavaScript was never meant to be used for applications. It was used for very basic things. And with it not being interpreted, and with it being fairly, in my eyes, a messy code language and not very well structured, certainly compared to C#, you just have to bear that in mind when you're writing the JavaScript. So one thing you'll discover simply by the end of this video, and doing two really basic things in JavaScript, like the scrolling down and the clicking, it already starts to become very hard to maintain and keep clean in comparison to C#. So we'll learn JavaScript, but we'll move almost instantly to TypeScript, which is just basically, you can still use JavaScript directly in it, but it's just a way of cleaning up the code, making it a bit more nice, friendly, adding features that are a bit more like C#. So we'll organize this as best we can in this video, and we'll go through, but bear in mind that it's not as clean as C#, but we'll add TypeScript, we'll start structuring things, thinking about it, and we'll get this as clean as possible, because when this grows, it's going to be hard to manage. If you are going to grow JavaScript to a large application, like when we do Facetto Word, we won't be using TypeScript, we'll move to bridge.net. And that will actually make us able to write pure C# code that compiles to JavaScript. So you actually use Visual Studio Code, and you can add all the features of the very latest Visual Studio and C#, and it will compile to JavaScript for you. But this is why I'm making this website first, so you learn the underlying language instead of just learning the higher level. So that's enough talk, let's just get straight into it. So we'll start with the easy one, which is clicking this button to do something. But we'll set up some fundamentals first. So nice and easy. A variable, just like C#, is var. We'll call this onload callbacks, and we'll make it an array. So this is an array of callbacks for when the page is loaded. And the var is a keyword like C#, but a note here that this is global. So everywhere in every JavaScript file, this is accessible. That's how it works. Again, don't ask me why. Don't worry about it too much. Just bear in mind that it's one of the things you have to be careful with JavaScript if you're writing pure JavaScript. We will be moving to TypeScript, which will get rid of that issue anyway. But a quick note on that this is now accessible anywhere. This is how you make an array. Simply specify an array. And then we're going to make a function. We are going to make a function, but what we want to do is, instead of just loading JavaScript, so basically when we typed alert and we said hi, and you might have said, well, when did that code know when to run? It just appears when the page loads. And it runs instantly as soon as the script's loaded. And because the script's at the top here, then it's loaded effectively before the page is loaded. So you'll save the file and you'll see the page doesn't exist yet. It's just the background. Then we click OK, and then the page is loaded. If we were to move this down to the bottom of the body and save, you'll see the page loads and then the message pops up. If we were to move it above to before the grid's there and save, the menu loads. So the point of it is that the JavaScript script file, wherever you include it, is when the script actually ends up getting run. So if you put actual code here, this gets run at the point in time of when it's loaded, directly in line. So that's another little quirk. What we want to quickly do is get a kind of, similar to C# when the application first spins up and you get your constructor or your static main function. You know, the point in time when your application's up and running and you want to then do something at the start. So in JavaScript, you class the start as when the page is loaded, and I want it when the page is fully loaded, so when my HTML's in. So to do that, we want to hook in to the document, which is, you know, the main HTML document, dot add event listener, and we've got some hints here in VS Code to help us. So this is a built-in thing in JavaScript document, which is this body. Add event listener is basically a function that you call. In here, you can specify specific events, and you can see there's loads of options here showing you, you know, all the options you've got. In fact, I don't think it's all the options. No, it isn't. But it's, you know, it's got a good selection there. And then here, we'll pass a string, and you have to type this exactly. And it's DOM content loaded. And that means the document object model, which is the page, HTML page, when the content's loaded, so when all this is loaded. The second part of that is expecting an actual function of what to do when that happens. So this is similar to C# when you pass in a function, you know, a task or a method into a function itself. So then we do function and open and close, and then make curly brackets and end it with a semicolon. So you've got the function here that we're calling. Parameter 1 is the string, DOM content loaded. And this function here, if you were to cut it out, you can see it's just, basically it's the second parameter. And you define the function inline like this. And now this gets called, this part here gets called when the content's loaded. So if we add the alert back in here that says hi, and bear in mind at the minute, this is in the top of the file. We're going to have to save them both first. So save that, ignore that a minute. So we're at the top of the file, and you can see that that loaded with nothing loaded. But now instead of running it straight away, we wait for the page to load and then call this when we save. Now, it doesn't matter where we place the script, this code is now running once the page is loaded. So even though it's at the very top, or even if you move it to, like we did before, say before the sample grid, and save, the sample grid's loaded, because our code now is waiting for the HTML to tell us that it's loaded, and then we run this event. So this first bit here is listen out for page content load event. And then here now, to make this more useful, we want to actually allow, you know, anywhere else in JavaScript to hook into a simple onload event, and that's what we'll make. So we'll make a function called process onload, which basically means this should run once. Process anything that should happen once the page is loaded. And then we'll make that function. So to make an actual function, similar to what we've just done there, same thing, function, give it a name, process onload. Just like C#, there's very little difference. You don't specify you know, public or private or things like that, so it's a little bit different. But in general, it's fairly similar. So this is again process any onload events, and all we want to do in here is loop every item in this callback that the user can add, and you'll see how we'll add to that in a minute. So these are going to just be an array of functions. We want to call every function in there. So to do a for each, it's very similar again to C#. So var I equals 0. I is less than on load callbacks dot length I plus. And then in here, we'd want to do the on callbacks, access the array item, and then invoke that function by doing brackets around it, basically. So that, I think, is all we'd want to do there. Let me see. Do we want to pass anything in? No, I think that's fine. So if we then make another function that somewhere else can now call, just called onload, and in the onload, we have them passing in a parameter, we'll call it callback, and that's going to be a function. This can be called to add a function to be invoked once the page loads. All you want to do here is add this callback to the list. So onload callbacks.push is the way you add to an array in JavaScript, and we'll push the callback in. So that's similar to doing like in a C# list, list.add. So it's an array.push. So that adds there. So now if we want to finally make use of this this system here, all this is purely for giving us the ability to say onload. So now if we're in another file, which we're not, we're just below, but presume we are, we'd then do onload, and we just pass in a function. And now we can make this call like this to do whatever we want, and we can say alert welcome. And if we save that, hopefully I've done it right, there's your welcome. And now the benefit is all through your code, because we'll need it multiple times on all the JavaScript we're writing, we can just say onload, and then you could say welcome to and save. Now you got welcome, welcome to. So the benefit of doing this, instead of simply placing the code directly in here, or everywhere you want to run something when the page loads, instead of having to do this function and try and remember document.addEventListener and all this lot here, you can now just do onload. So that's what we've done there. We've made a function. We've first listened for the document to load, and then we've called this function. This function then loops everything inside of the onload callback, and basically gets the item at that position in the array. So in this case, like the callback itself, and then we invoke it by doing this. So this is just like calling a function, like calling onload and calling it. But the difference is we're calling the callback that was passed in. So we're calling like this function. So that's what's happening there. So loop each item, call the callback. And then what you can also do, instead of having to remember this, because I'm used to in C# just doing like, list.forEach and then looping through the list. So to get a similar thing, in the most up-to-date JavaScript, they do actually have forEach, but it's not modern enough that there's still browsers that don't support it. So we'll make another function, a helper function, that will bake into this core. So we'll call this function forEach, and we'll have the array that we want to iterate over, and then we'll have a callback for each item, and then we'll pass in the item to that callback. So we'll say helper function to iterate over arrays. And then we'll basically cut this, paste it here. We'll loop over, now in this case, the array we pass in. And then here, this is going to be a function that is passed in, but it needs to know the item. So we'll call the callback, but then we want to pass the item in from the array. So we'll say array I. So loop each item, pass the item back to the function. And now we'll change this code here to say for each. First item is the actual array itself, and the next one's the callback, which is going to be a function, and it's going to have a parameter given to us called item. And then there's our little for each loop again, so it looks similar to C#. So this will get passed in. This on callback then would be iterated over here, and then for each item in that list, it'll call this function here, and the item is basically this. It's been passed in, this array I, which is each item in the array. So now we can loop over each one, and then we wanted to call the item itself. So invoke the actual, invoke the callback. Because the item from there is a callback, so that's why we're invoking the action. Save that and it still works. So that's just a bit of cleanup. I can't resist myself. I can't just write ugly looking JavaScript. I have to try and clean it up and make it look familiar to C#. So we've got a little class here. This is really, that's why I've called it core. This is kind of all your basics. So your onload I'm classing as a basic event. Your for each is like a helper method. Process onload simply called when you actually load here. And then this is a function we make for being usable. So they can just say, they can do this basically whenever it loads. So we'll delete that bit because that was just to show you. And now this is really the core class that's got those functions in. So that's that done. Now let's move on to getting this menu working, which is nice and easy. So Control N, make a new class, save, change it to all, and then we'll call this one dna.topmenu.js. Go back to the index page, copy and paste, and dna.topmenu.js. Save that. Go back to the top menu, make sure it's working again. Yep, so we have that. Now in here, we mentioned what we wanted to do is when we click this hamburger menu, that we want to intercept that click. And then when we intercept that click, we want to add a class. So if we go to our menu here, this menu icon, we basically want to add the class here of expanded, I believe it was. Oh, not that one, sorry. Just get rid of that a minute. It was when we click this icon, this is the icon itself, we want to add the expanded to this class here. So you can see this was already added. So if we remove that, this is what you would have seen. So what we want to do with JavaScript is add the class called expanded, which we styled for in the other video, and that'll get us to this. So in order to do that, we will first do an onload, because we don't want to do anything until the actual page is loaded. So once the page is loaded, we're ready to do what we need. Now everything's in the page, we want to scan and try and find this element. So the way we'll find this element is, and it's up to you how you do this, but the way I'm going to find it in this script is that I've appended this hashtag top menu. And it's just a name I've come up with. The hashtag basically means that the page won't reload. You'll see up here, it's a hash, and this is an anchor to a page. So this would actually work if we were to, the original point of the hashtag here is if we were to make a, let's go down here, make a header and test. And the, what is this? I think it's the ID. So the ID would be, say, top menu. And then save. And now if I click, I have broken things. Why have I broken all this? Or have I not? Oh yeah, it's because that's already selected. So if I was to now click this menu here, you can see it's jumped, and you can't quite tell because it's at the very bottom there, but it's jumped to this, tried to jump to this header down here called test. So if we were to just do like paragraph and just put loads of paragraphs in so it jumps down, you can see it jumps to test because of this hash, which is, it's a hashtag, but I guess it means the ID it's looking for is top menu. So that's the original point of a hashtag in HTML, is to jump to an element in the page that has an ID matching that name. So the reason I've used this here, and the reason you'll find that lots of people use it in JavaScript, is if your JavaScript fails and you click this button, and this is a nonsensical name, nothing happens. I mean, it adds it up here, but it doesn't end up refreshing your page or crashing your page. So it's kind of just a nice fallback to a potential failure. So we had a reference to the link called hashtag top menu, and we can now at least find this menu. And again, this wasn't in when we did the HTML, so this is how it looked. And rather, I don't know whether you even just had that in the last video, but basically we'll put hashtag top menu. So now we want to select the element that has this, or in fact any element, because we could have multiple places we want to click to expand the menu. So the first thing is then, how do we select this menu? in order to, not this menu, this button, in order to intercept the physical click action of it. So what we want to do is find all elements that have a href of hashtag top menu. And to do that, we do, we'll save our menu expanders, is what we'll call them, equals, and then we will do document.query selector all, which basically means search with a CSS style selector, search the whole document for elements, and this is an exact CSS selector, so you can use this in CSS to do your selecting. We want to make the angle brackets, which means a data attribute. So if you want to just select all anchors, you just do A. So let's just start with all anchors. Just catch them all on the page. Keep it simple. Then if you want to also debug this in a way, you've got full debuggers in Firefox and things, and you can debug JavaScript and stuff. I didn't really bother using that. It's not, JavaScript isn't complicated enough to be bothered with debugging. What instead I do is I go to the console, and then what you can write here is just console.debug, and you can pass in the menu expanders. And you can literally save and dump out, and you can see it's dumped out a list of all elements on the page, a list of all anchors on the whole page. Everywhere there's an anchor, it's found one. So that's how I kind of debug. I know it's a lazy method, and we've got proper debugging where you could actually step into your top menu code and, you know, place a breakpoint here, you know, and then I don't actually use this, so I'm trying to find my way around. Well, let's refresh the page. Nope. Do I just reload the page? Yeah, so then that's kind of hit a breakpoint like Visual Studio. Step over, I guess, and then, you know, that's that. But like I say, I don't use that, so I'm not going to use that. I just output to the console if I need to. So we can see there we've actually managed to select all the anchors throughout the page. We'll leave it like that for now. We'll change it to select just this one in a minute. So we can use the helper function we made for each, pass in the menu expanders because it's an array. For each menu expander, we want to then, so loop each menu expander. And if you're first learning JavaScript and you don't know the C# and you haven't watched my kind of starter C# videos, you probably want to watch those because this will help you with, you know, some of the things I'm not explaining or saying about these functions, is because if you know the C# videos I've done, they kind of, you know, you get your knowledge there about general programming. So we'll loop each menu item. And now this is where we want to listen on the click events that we were saying. So we want to listen on the click event. And to do that again, similar to how we did document.add event listener, this time we'll do it on the item. So the anchor that we found, item.add event listener. And then here it's called click this time, as you kind of expect. And you've got the function that you are going to run here now when the item's clicked. So again, start with the basics, alert hi, and save. And now when we click here, it says hi. And I think we've got anchors somewhere else apparently on the page. Not sure where they are, but not that it matters. We're only bothered about this first one. So you click it says hi, so that's fine. Let's just fix this query then. Now we know it works. And again, this is just like a CSS selector. So to, let's say, select the logo. So you could just say image, all images. And when the image is clicked, you can get the hi. So this is just, the selector here is kind of a CSS selector. You can do top menu standard. So because that's a class, it's dot top menu standard. And save that. And again, now when you click anywhere in the top menu, you'll get the, you know, the click event. So think of this as purely just a CSS selector. And again, I've done a video on making CSS selectors. So we want to now select this specific hamburger menu. So to do that, we're basing it on the fact that we have a top menu as the href attribute. So to access an attribute, you do square brackets and then just type it, so href. That'll simply find any element that's got a href attribute regardless of value. But we want a specific value, so put equals, single quotes to give it the value inside, and then hash top menu. And now this CSS selector should select just this item, which it does. And if you want to check there's only one, you can do the console.debug menu expanders, press F12 in the web page thing there, and then save this file. And you can see it's here. So the node list is 1, and this has got this anchor on it here. So, you can see that's the item. And you can also click, and it'll take you to the item it's selected with this little, icon here. So that's the hamburger menu selected. Then we loop for all of them because you could have multiple. And then for each one, when it's clicked, we run a function. What you will notice, if you keep an eye on the URL at the top, it's got nothing there. When we click, we show the hi box, but then it also carries on doing whatever the link was going to do, which could be to navigate you somewhere else. So we want to stop that from happening. We want to prevent that actual click from ever registering as a standard click. So to do that, we know this is working now. So we'll say cancel navigation, as in stop the anchor working, stop the clickable link working. To do that, we need to, though, add the variable here to the click event called E. You can call it whatever you want, give it any name you like, it doesn't matter. But if you provide one here, it will pass in an event to this click action. And inside that event, you have something on here called prevent default, a function. And that means prevent the default action from happening, the default click. So if we save that now and you look at the URL at the top and we click, now you can see it doesn't do anything. We basically disabled the link. So if you wanted to disable all links on the page, you just do, A, and then for when the click prevent default, that would basically stop every link on the whole page from working, just in case you wanted to know that. So this now prevents the click from happening. And instead of that, we now want to add the desired class to this item. And because I don't want here, what we could do, again, for ease, is we want to be able to find what elements we want this adding to, because, we haven't told it what elements we want to add in. So again, to select, the way I tag elements for this function is if it's a top menu, then we're expecting to tag a top menu, if you will. So on the actual menu itself that we're bothered about, we're going to add a data top menu, and this is just an attribute we're making up. Data top menu, what do we call it? Class. Because what we'll do, you could just do this, so it could find this element. Just add an attribute called data top menu class. And now in here, similar to how we found all elements of top menu, we can now add the desired class to all top menus. The way you'd find it is to say top menus equals query all, and then this time it's any element with data top menu class, which we have here, and that'll simply select them all. And then you can do a for each on them again. So for each top menu, and this is the UL itself, the actual listed menu. Menu, we'll call this. For each menu, and then we say add desired class. So you'd say top menu, and this is how you add this top menu now, or rather menu, this top menus. The other thing you'll also find in JavaScript is you'll get no errors, no warnings in here when you're saving about things not existing. You'll get a bit in the console, but it's not compiled, so you get kind of no warning. So like when I'd missed that S off, that would have still ran, it would have just complained. So top menus, menu. So each menu item from the for each is going to be the items that were found that is data top menu class. So it's going to be this UL. So what we'll do is add a class to that, which is what we want to do. And to add a class, you do the menu item itself .classList.add. Well, in this case, we want to toggle it because we want it to be added then removed. Each time you click, you want to change it. And the class was expanded. And if we save that now and click, you can see it adds, removes. So if we inspect the menu itself, so here's the menu. When we click this icon here, we've already intercepted that click. We then find all of the elements in the document that have data top menu class as an attribute, which is there. And we add then to the class itself of the item the word expanded. So that's all working there. However, the reason I then want to put a value here is because say you've got multiple menus or you simply want to reuse this for other styling. You just want something to style whenever you click this menu slides in. Maybe you want to style the background a different color. And you could then just add data top menu class to the backgrounders, like say to the entire body, and style it a different way. So using this data attribute, you can give it a value. So we might as well then give it a value of the class we want to get added to the UL. So let's just say my class. And now what we want to do is simply replace the code to find to get the value of this top menu class, the actual value. So inside of here then, we would have var menu class equals, and then we want to get the value of this data top menu. So to get the value, it's menu dot get attribute because it's an attribute on the element. And then we want the data top menu class. And you'll notice we don't put the square brackets in here because this is actually saying we want an attribute. This is trying to select something, and by doing the square brackets around it, we're telling it we want to select a data attribute because this could be anything. It doesn't have to be an attribute. Whereas this is explicitly getting an attribute. It doesn't need the brackets, it just needs the names. So the menu class will get attribute. And again, if you're wondering what that is, you can console debug it. But instead, I'm just going to replace the word expanded and the class we add and add the menu class straight to the class. Now we save that and we open this and we take a look at here now. When we click this, you can see it now adds my class. Nothing happens because that isn't a style we've done anything with. But now, by simply tweaking here, we can tell it to add whatever class we want based on the event. So that's the top menu basically done. That's all we're doing is whenever the item's clicked, whenever this specific item's clicked based on this, we selected it based on this, then we intercept the click, stop it happening, find then all elements in the HTML that have a data top menu class, which we then simply added here. So this is kind of how we're finding things in JavaScript. We're adding these data attributes to the items, and you have to start it with the word data dash because if an attribute starts with data dash, then you can type anything afterwards and it's valid. Whereas if you tried to type in hello equals test, let's see if anything complains in the console about that fact. So it's not complaining here, but basically if you ran this through a parser that checked for valid HTML, it would complain that that's not a valid attribute name. So you want to start it with data dash, and that's why you'll see that in many websites as well. So really that's, like I say, the top menu done. Now we'll move on to the scroll. So next thing we want to do, we've done those two classes, commented, okay, let's add one more here. Find the value, or rather get a value of the data top menu class attribute. Add, remove class. So that's those two done. We've got the for each, the onload, we don't need that open. Control N to make another class, save, make a file, go to webroot, assets, JavaScript, and we'll call this one dna.scroll.core.js because we're going to make similar to the core in general. I mean, we could actually say dna.core.scroll So it's a core thing, but to be honest, we'll do scroll.core. This is going to change with TypeScript anyway, but make this file, DNA scroll core, do the usual alert, hi, and save, and it's not there. Go to the index, add it here, save, and now we know we've got the class back in. So we're ready to go again. So in this, now what we want to do is first, and obviously we need to intercept this scroll. We need to figure out what's going on with the scroll and do something with it. So we'll start with, and we'll do something similar to the onload. So whenever the page loaded, we fire an event. We want to do exactly the same thing, but this time, whenever the page scrolls, we want to fire an event. So very similar to the last time, we'll make a variable called scroll callbacks this time. And it's an array. So callbacks to fire when the page scrolls. And we did function like we did on load, we'll have on scroll. And it'll expect a callback, so exactly the same as the core. Adds a function to be called whenever the page scrolls. And then I think we just did scroll. In fact, we want to, this just wants to add, doesn't it? Scroll callbacks dot push callback. So add callback to list. So that's the one, the usual call. And then we had, like we did process on load, we'll do process on scroll. So we're kind of following the same practice as before. Process is what should happen when the page scrolls. And for now, all we want to do, all we care about is loop each callback for each. Get there in a minute. Scroll callbacks, and there's a function where we get the item back. And one thing you'll also notice here, I name the function starting with an uppercase. In standard JavaScript, it's typically lowercase like this. I don't like that, so I don't do that. I like the capitalization for functions. So that's why you'll see all my functions in uppercase. I'm sure plenty of you will complain if you already know JavaScript and say it's non-standard and blah, 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 but I don't like lowercase for functions. So if you're wondering why they're all uppercase and yet you see JavaScript examples looking different than mine, you'll also see this curly bracket up here. Again, I hate that because then you can't visibly match if this has got an open and close bracket because the close is here, the open's somewhere random over here. Again, that's standard in JavaScript, but I don't like it. So if you're looking at some, visually this looks different than some JavaScript style-wise, that's because this is my style and I make it up as I go. So just thought I'd throw that out there in case, some people want to comment on that. That's the reason why. I think it looks nicer and cleaner this way. So loop back, we basically loop at every callback, and then inside we call the callback. So we just call the item. And that's it. So now we need to actually just hook into the scroll event itself. So the scroll event will be, this time it's not the document, it's the window. So hook into page scrolling. So instead of document, we do window, and it is window.addEvent listener as usual. And this time, you might have guessed it, it's scroll. Same thing again, function. Don't care about any kind of information about that. So now, fire every time we scroll. So I can be really annoying here and just do alert and pop up an alert box every single time a pixel scrolls. So we scroll, it says hi, 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 hi. It's already sent loads of events because it's scrolled 20 odd pixels, so we've got 20 events. So one of the first things you can tell is going to be happening here is you scroll once with your mouse, but you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 21, 22, like 23 calls there. So that's I mentioned JavaScript is not efficient. If you are going to do things on this call, that's going to be really overkill. You're going to be firing off events like crazy. So one of the things we want to do is handle this event a bit nicer. So this could be it. We could now say that the event's fired here. We just call process scroll. Process. But that's, like I said, that's overkill. That's too many things happening at once. Too much firing going on. So what we'll do instead is we'll create a little system here now where we will start a kind of a timer that once you start scrolling, until you stop, or rather, once you start scrolling, we'll wait for 100 milliseconds and then fire the event. So we'd fire at most 10 events a second. You don't want to overdo the scrolling. So all we do is tone it down. So that's what we'll do now. So we'll need a few variables for this. We will have we'll have a scroll timer callback ID, which is nothing right now. And this is for the timeout. So when we start a timeout, it'll give us a number, like an integer, that lets us keep track of the timeout itself. So this is just kind of used as a tracking ID. So tracking ID for the scroll timer. And then we'll have the last scroll time, so we can keep track of when we last scrolled and see the difference in time. So the last time we scrolled. We will have the update interval, so how often to update when scrolling. And this is in milliseconds, so we'll do scroll update interval. We'll do 100, like we say, so fire it once, or rather 10 times a second. And before we do this, I guess, what you could do is process on scroll, or in here, you could just do, say, console.debug I++. And that doesn't exist, but JavaScript's happy doing that, I'm pretty sure. Scroll, no, okay, for I equals 0. And there you can see when we're scrolling, you know, we're getting, there's 200 events nearly already, just from a few scrolls. So by default, you're going to get one scroll of the mouse button's 22 fires, one more scroll is 41. So as it stands right now, we're getting hit a lot of times. So that's what we're going to fix. So we've got the updated info we want to fire it at most. Let's change it to a second for now, so it's a lot slower to see when we do it. So you want to fire it at most once every second. Now what we need to do is, in this, instead of just processing the scroll straight away, so instead of doing all that, we want to first check if we've never called. So if this is null, basically, if the scroll timer callback is never fired, which it will be in the first place. So if the last callback has finished, in which case we'd set it to null, or it has never been fired. And again, all this stuff you could get from typical when somebody's in a web development page or somebody's doing the JavaScript. Nobody would write this. So they just go, oh, let's Google for how to detect a scroll, and we'll install jQuery, or we'll install a library. But that is part of the biggest problem with web developers, is they never know anything. They never do anything themselves. It's just what you call script junkies or code junkies. They just simply copy and paste what they find. So yes, you could do this with a script that's out there, but why when it's like 100 lines of code and half an hour to do? Just do it yourself. Learn the knowledge. You know, keep it clean and small. Don't go adding hundreds of different JavaScript libraries all over the place. So a little bit of a rant over there again, but let's get back to what we're doing. So if it's never been fired, so if not scroll timer, so that basically means if that's null. So if we've never fired yet, if we've never run anything, if this is the first time we've scrolled, so that would be if the last scroll time is 0, which is our default value. So if this is literally the very first time the user scrolled the mouse on this page, then we want to set the last scroll time to the current time in ticks, which is just a value of time from Enox or something. Never remember exactly what it is. To get that, just do new.date .getTime. And you can see what I mean here about how JavaScript by default does lowercase for variable names, which I just don't think looks nice there. So this will do update the last scroll time. And then process the scroll. So let's just move that debug into process scroll for now. And let's then move that into here. So if we were, where's that gone? Whoa, bit big. If we were to run this code now, what should happen is this is null because we've never set it. It is the first time we scroll. So it updates the time and it runs once. The next scroll event comes in. This is still null, but this is no longer 0 because it's been set to the date time. So what should happen right now is, as we scroll this page now, you can see we get one event fired, and that's it, it stops. So that's a good start. We detect the first scroll and we fire it, which is, what we want to do. But we also want to, so after this, if it's the first time and we've processed, good. Otherwise, or rather either, doesn't matter, whichever. So now, either way, start a timeout to fire after the interval. So to do a timer, similar to, say, in C# when you're doing a task and you just do a, task.delay 1 second and then do something, or, whatever. If you just want to run something in a certain period from now, in JavaScript, you do set timeout. And in here, it's expecting the milliseconds of how long to wait before it fires, and it's also expecting the function. So the function comes first, the thing you want to do. So if we do function, the second property to the thing is the timeout. So in this case, we called it scroll update interval. And then, as I mentioned, this set timeout will return a value. So we'll set that in a minute. But let's say in here now, we just do alert, hi, our favorite little JavaScript. And we save. What should happen now is the first time we scroll, it will say process on scroll. This is kind of going to screw up a little bit because this will hit every single scroll event, so 22 times in one scroll. But what will happen is we'll set up this set timeout, so once we scroll, nothing should happen for a second, and then we'll be hit by all these highs. So if we scroll, it's a second later, and then we get all of the high messages. So that's the set timeout is simply going to run something the time after it's mentioned here. So we want to make use of this set timeout and simply to just give this a value. So we'll set this scroll timer callback ID to the return value of this. So we know that it's run. And now the next scroll won't get called because of the fact that now we've got a timer. So if we save this time, we scroll, we get 0. A second later, we get that. And now that's it, it won't fire again. So we're slowly building up here to what we want, which the point is, once you've scrolled, you want to just ignore what's happening with the scroll for, 1/10 of a second, which is nothing. You don't need it to, the split second you scroll, you don't need this to disappear up there. You're okay. You don't need to be that proactive. And the reason for doing all this is to make your website more efficient, so it doesn't slow down on mobile phones or overload the browser and use a lot of battery and things like that. So even though JavaScript had run without all this, and you could have just chucked in process scroll here, you've got to be conscious of what you're doing. The fact that that's going to run 22 times in one scroll of a mouse. Do you really want to be putting that much work on the machine and the browser? So once we've scrolled, we wait for the interval time. Once timer is done, clear the ID so it can be called again. So once that timer's up, we'll say scroll timer ID equals null. Here we could say, let's just do console.debug. I scrolled. at, and then new date dot get time. And then if I scroll, you'll see a second later, I scrolled at this time. I scroll again, it'll now tick. But now I can scroll up and down the page. Doesn't matter how much I'm scrolling. This is now calmed down to only ever firing once a second, which is what we want. And then once you stop, it's updated. So now you've gone from firing, your 100 and 200 odd events within, scrolling the page up and down once, to an event limited by time, once a second, which is what we want. So once we've done, clear it, and then here, at this point, you want to just do the same thing, update and process. So you actually do your command. So now if we save this and scroll, you'll see now we get the process running at a nice rate. That's a bit slow because we don't want it a second, we want it like 1/10 of a second, but you see the point now. You're scrolling the page, and now you'll simply get this callback. Anyone that listens to on scroll now will get fired within, when we change this to 1/10, it'll now happen a lot cleaner. So to give a comparison to that, when we scroll there, it's 4 with scrolling, I think, about twice on my wheel. If I were to do this on the scroll event itself, scroll twice, and we've done 24 there. 48, I think, actually, because it was about there. So the difference between our now clean code is, a handful of calls instead of 40, 50. So we've reduced the workload of the browser there by 80% with just this little bit of code. And this wasn't exactly hard. You can now read through this code, you can see what it's doing. And that's it. There's your little helper for your scroll. So now we can call this on scroll event and do what we want with it. So the point of this whole scroll core was to add that browser-friendly, low-impact scrolling. And I've just made that up, so, it's free to use. You can do what you want with it. There's, I don't really care what you do with it. But I do always make you think that don't just type JavaScript and not think about how intensive it is on the browser. So let's make a new file and close that one now. Save, same old, JavaScript. We'll call this one dna.scroll. We'll just call it scrolldown.js. And this time we want to do stuff when we scroll down. So we'll have a function that finds any elements with a data scroll down class attribute, and adds that class to them when we scroll from the top of the page. And what we'll also do, actually, saying that, is because we want this menu, well, no, we'll do it in, yeah, I can do it somewhere. No, we'll just, fine. Also, I was contemplating this, do we do it when we're a bit off the top of the page? So we don't do it instantly, we do it at another point. I'm just trying to think where we do that. Do we bake it into the on scroll? In fact, the on scroll, no, we can do it in, we don't need to do it in core, we'll do it in this class. So we'll start by doing it as soon as you scroll, but then what I'll probably do is leave the menu big until we scroll, a little bit down to make it look nicer. So anyway, first thing we want to do is onload. So wait till the page is loaded to do what we want, as usual. Wait for page to load. And then in here, we add this class that we want to do here. So we'll make a variable scroll down items, which is what we want to find. We do the same thing again, document.query select all. And in here, we'd want the data attribute to be data scroll down class. And then we'd want to do for each of those scroll down items, function, get the item back. for each element, they're technically called elements on the HTML. We would then want to we want to find them at the start. We don't want to do a for each here, actually, saying that. We will want to, but not yet. So what we want to do instead is hook into the onScroll, as we mentioned. So once the page scrolls, so once you load the page, you find all the elements with that data attribute once, and then every time the page scrolls, so every time the page scrolls, then that's when you'd want to do this for each, once you're happy with whatever you want to do. So we'll do what we want to do here is, as we scroll down, we want to add the class, and as we scroll back to the top, we want to remove it. So as soon as you're off the top, we want to add a class. And as soon as you're back to the top, we want to remove it. So we need to keep a flag of whether we're scrolled down or up. So keep track of if we are scrolled down or up. Because once you're past there, again, this comes down to efficiency. You could simply say here. So again, let's give you an example doing it. So if we are off the top of the page, so if, and then what you need to do here is detect the scroll position. So that's not quite as easy as you'd think to handle multiple browsers. Like, you know, Firefox does it one way, Chrome does it another. So the scroll position is not just simply a one command. So what we're going to do is make a helper function called scroll position top, because we only care about the top for now. Or really it's scroll position Y, but you know, scroll position top's fine. We'll chuck this in the scroll core class. We'll just add a helper function here, that's fine. Function scroll position top gets the scroll position top of the window. And we have multiple ways to get this, so we'll return a value this time. One way is window.scroll_y. So I think we'll actually change to scroll position y. You know, x and y. X is horizontal, y is vertical. So this is your y scroll bar, and this way be your x scroll bar. So you can return window.y, but that might fail. So then you can do an or, because if this is null, basically if this doesn't exist, then it'll go to the or statement. So this is a good way of kind of stringing it together. If that one doesn't exist, you can try scroll top, which is another one that should exist. If that fails, you can fall back to document.get element by tag name. And the tag is HTML to get the main HTML body. You want the first element of that, there'll only ever be one. And then the scroll top, and that's for the really old browsers. So this is the most modern way that should work. This is kind of a fallback to Internet Explorer, and this is a fallback even further. So that's just a way to basically make sure we always get the scroll position in any browser. So now we call scroll position Y. So if the scroll position Y is greater than 0, then we could then do the for each element that we had, we'd want to add the class. But again, just for quickness to show you the inefficient way, we will do, in fact, it'd be in every item as well. There's only one, but it doesn't matter. Console.debug I++. Otherwise, you'd do console.debug, you'd remove the class. So either way, you'd be doing something. So this is adding and removing a class from every item that we found, which could be a lot more than one. And now, what's it complaining about here? Okay, so we're not getting anything at the minute. Oh, that's changed my casing to the JavaScript function, not mine. on scroll. Really? What's going on? Oh, we haven't added this JavaScript class. Yeah, I forgot my little alert to make sure the class was included. dna.scroll dot, what do we call it? Scroll down. Yep. There we go. So you can see we've found it. We scroll, and you can see how many times, even with our efficient scrolling, we'd be adding and removing a class every time. So once you scroll down, this has got the class. And instead we'd be constantly telling it to add the class, add the class, add the class, add the class, when there's no need. Once the class is added, as soon as you've scrolled, you only want to add it or remove it once you're back to the top. Otherwise, you don't need to keep rerunning your code. So again, you could just do when it scrolls. If you're not at the top, you do one function. If you're otherwise, if you're at the top, you do another. So you want to do that, but you basically just want to keep track of if you're already off the bottom. Don't just keep refiring. So keep track if we're at the top or bottom. So we'll have var scroll down equals false, because we always start at the top of the page, or at least that's the presumption. So keep track of a scroll down. On scroll, then we can do first we want to get scroll position. So window top equals scroll position y. And then we'll do, if we have not scrolled down, and we are now scrolled down, and that would look like, so if we haven't scrolled down and we now are scrolled down, which is window top is greater than, and this way you can say 0. I'm going to just chuck this into a variable. So scroll down detect start, we'll call it. Place this in a variable up here. Var scroll down detect, and we'll just chuck it to 0 for now. The position at which to class as not at the top, if you will. So if you're not scrolled down and we now are scrolled down, so we've gone further past that, then at this point we want to loop every element. You can delete all this now. And then for every element in there, want to add the desired class. And the first thing we need to do is actually add this to somewhere. So data scroll down class is the attribute we want to add. And we want this to be on the nav menu, I believe, top menu standard. So we've actually got it here. We added that. So if you haven't added that, just add that to your top menu. And we've got the class that we want to add is reduced, because when we add the class that we styled called reduced, the menu shrinks. So this will find that top menu item. When we scroll down and we weren't scrolled down originally, we should then also flag we have scrolled down. Scroll down equals true. So then that'll stop it firing again, because now it won't fire a second time. And then add the desired class. So for this, you do the item. And again, you want to do the class list. And this time, instead of the toggle that we did, we want to add it specifically. And the value we want to add is, again, the item.getAttribute, like we did for the other one. And it's the data scroll down class. So that should add the class to the item. So if we save that and look at the console, if we scroll down, you can see it's actually styled for us. I don't know why I looked at the console, I should have looked at this. So if we reload that page, there's no class here. We scroll down, it adds the class that you saw that flash, and this menu shrinks. And now it doesn't re-add, doesn't keep trying to add, and you can test that by doing console.debug high to show that when it's running. And then as you scroll down, fires the once and doesn't fire again. So we've made sure that basically once we scroll down, we add the class, and that's all we need to do. Now we need to detect when we scroll back up. So we've detected there if we scroll down, Then else if we scrolled back up is what we need to detect. So that's else if. So if we were scrolled down already, and now we're scrolled up, so now the window top is less than or equal to the scroll down detect start, which we specified. So basically the exact opposite logic. So if we weren't scrolled down and now we are, we run this. Or if we are scrolled down and now we're not, we run this. So same again, copy and paste practically the same code. Fix the indents. We're now not scrolled down. Flag we are not scrolled down. For each element, now remove the class and save that. So now if we scroll down, it shrinks. Hopefully when we scroll up, it removes it. And you can see then in here, add, remove, add, remove. And that's basically it. That's all there is to a nice responsive full top menu. One of the hardest things to actually do in web development, specifically without using somebody else's code, some libraries, a huge overcomplicated templating system. In here, you can look at all the code yourself. There's the whole HTML. There's the CSS, the Sass, but this includes styling for everything, not just the menu. The menu itself is basically top menu. It's just there. So keeps it nice and clean. And the JavaScript is what we've written ourselves. So 39 lines of code, 60, so 100 lines of code, 150, 180 lines of code. No libraries, no third-party tools, nothing. And we've got ourselves a fully responsive top menu that shrinks and grows. The other thing we'll just do is the scroll down now. Let's change this position to say 200 and save. So now when we scroll, it stays big. And then once you get a bit further down, it shrinks once you start going. Scroll back up, and before is the scroll bar. Before you get right to the top, it grows. So it's up to you where you set that. I'll set that to something like 50, just so it doesn't instantly shrink. It takes, set it to 60 just off one standard scroll bar. So it starts going, it gives it a chance to scroll, and then that animates in after. So it's a bit more, just looks smoother. So that's it. That's the whole JavaScript. So it's been a practical introduction to JavaScript. Everything's written directly. There's no libraries. There's nothing but raw JavaScript here. And we tried to organize it into clean files. The fact that we've got to include all these files will fix when we move to TypeScript, because it will compile to one script. And again, TypeScript is still JavaScript. It just simply adds things on top of it to make it nicer to work with and more, I'd say more C# friendly, if you will. You can add classes and object-oriented things to the design. So hopefully this video was a good introduction, a good practical introduction to JavaScript. Any thoughts or comments, as usual, let me know.